Hey there, everyone. So good to be here. We're live with Leadership for Innovators Spotlight. I'm Emilia Chagas, and I'm thrilled to be your host. We're bringing you these live interviews every other Wednesday, noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. And yeah, here's the deal this is all about interaction. So we want you to be part of the conversation. So drop your questions here, your comments, and even if you're watching it afterwards, we will go back to them. We will comment with you, answer or attend to your questions. And yeah, this is your chance to have your questions answered, your ideas heard. So, all right, let's get to our amazing guest today. Here she is. We have Manpreet Dhillon with us. Welcome, Manpreet.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited for the conversation today.
Yes, likewise. I'm happy to meet you today. I'm so happy to have you here with us. Thank you for joining. And everyone, Manpreet has over 20 years of experience. She is the founder of Veza Global, an equity, diversity, and inclusion firm with a special focus on elevating equality at decision making tables of people with culturally diverse backgrounds. Isn't that amazing? She has coached leaders for over 10,000 hours, and she's here with us today. So let's take advantage of this. Manpreet, here, before we start talking about your amazing experience and your work, one thing that I would like to ask you is to kick things off is actually what brings you joy? Tell us something about yourself that we cannot learn by reading your LinkedIn profile, please.
Well, there's two things that really bring me joy. Making puzzles. I love making puzzles. And I took up Korean traditional painting, and that has been so fun for me. Like just to learn
Wow.
paint technique and just making random paintings. I think I'm a superstar, but I there's no way that's ever going to be in a gallery. But it's been so fun, and so every time I get into the painting world, it just kind of like slows me down and brings me back to myself again, which I love.
This is a habit that we're seeing, not exactly Korean traditional painting, but other hobbies, other activities that slow our minds down a little bit, moves us from screens and especially the cell phone. That's something we've been hearing a lot from really exponential leaders, people who are super productive. They are doing that. That's not a coincidence, is it? This is intentional, isn't it?
Completely. Like one of the things my therapist always like, he's like, learn to get bored because when you're bored is actually when you're creative. Your
Yeah.
creative energy actually flows when your brain actually slows down and actually goes down into certain brain waves. That's actually when the creativity sparks up. So when you're thinking about leaders and innovators and entrepreneurs, the slowness is actually when all the power and the magic actually happens. Like I personally don't do Friday meetings, and I don't do. I take Wednesday afternoons off just for that slowness, just to have that break and not have my brain turned on all the time, so I can have that pause as well.
That's amazing. A great suggestion right away from the start. That's something that it sounds for many of us, especially people who are in the beginning of their careers, it may sound luxurious to have an afternoon off, right? But at the same time, it makes us better at what we do. So yeah, I'll definitely take this one for myself and anyone who's listening, watching us. Maybe they will be inspired by you as well. So now, Manpreet, can you briefly describe to us your professional journey, how it led to your mission of coaching, improving organizations in their EDI maturity journey too?
So my journey is
How
like
did?
it is all over the place, but it's funny because I didn't realize until a few years ago that at 13 I decided that I wanted to end racism, end war, and end sexism. And also I always joke because I had eggs in there too, but I eat eggs all the time. But anyways, and so then I started off my journey. I started off in kinesiology. I wanted to study the body, study how the brain worked. So things happened, didn't finish the program, I ended up in electronic engineering. And then I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. But all of it actually tied into a few things because one of the things that I learned, I ended up going doing management consulting, background in organizational consulting and organizational management. HR is my forte. I've been doing equity, diversity, inclusion work for about 20 years. But the beautiful thing was, because I studied the body and I studied how engineering, like systems, I was able to study how organizations function in a different way, and how bodies thrive in the workplace as well. And from that, it led me to volunteer. Volunteerism was huge for me. I volunteered with an organization, started looking at how, when we bring cultures together, we actually focus on the similarities, people start to thrive. So then I'm like, well, how do we do that in the workplace? And that's actually how my journey in equity, diversity, inclusion really started. So I started to bring that into the workplace. I'm like, the more that we get people to think about how their backgrounds actually are better for the workplace, they're going to thrive in the workplace. And so then that's where that started from. And then with the coaching side, because I was so lucky that when I was stuck in my career, like actually quite early on, I didn't like my job. I thought I should be at a much better job than I was. I got a coach, and within a month, I got a promotion. The next time I got a coach, within 3 months, I got a promotion. And so for me, I'm like, okay, I should tap into the knowledge, like this wisdom as well. And I found that the coaching skills has been the most fabulous thing. It's allowed me to understand people. It's actually allowed me to get to know individuals. And I started to realize that when you ask people questions, they feel like they're accepted and they belong. And they're more willing to work with you regardless of whatever's happening. And so it actually just changed all of my relationships. And so, so I've been a coach for over 15 years now, when coaching wasn't really a thing. And I started my equity, diversity, inclusion consulting company 6 years ago. And we have global clients. We work with various levels of government and the UN and tech companies across the world. And we're really fortunate because we have a really solid small team, scrappy. But it's also been really powerful to think about, as a woman in kind of in tech, but not really, but how, never thought I would be here. Like I grew up in to immigrant parents. Women didn't really work outside the home, or they worked in labor jobs. And to be able to be into rooms that women like that I grew up with and never were a part of has been amazing. And it's been, yes, it's been a really powerful experience, but a lot of it was taking risks, taking chances, following my intuition, and just doing things even though they would feel right but didn't make sense. I do a lot of that in my career, and it's been amazing. Actually,
Wow.
Yeah, amazing results.
That's so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you talk about in this coaching experience of yours, coaching so many leaders, helping people improve their leadership attributes. You mention forgiveness as a key leadership attribute, and that's something I want to bring up right away, because this is a hot topic for 2024. A lot of people, including the ability to forgive, into their goals for their personal lives this year more than ever. And as leaders, we could definitely use more of forgiveness, right? So I want to hear you on this element that we see in terms of personal development, in terms of improvement of relationships outside of the workplace, being included in the workplace, in the relationship we have with our colleagues, with our direct reports. How does forgiveness play in terms of becoming or being used, or maybe allowing us to become better leaders?
Yeah. So I'm going to say some things that might not sit well with people. So I'm going to just preface that now. One of the biggest things is when we have problems in the workplace, it usually is because that person reminds us someone from our past. And what happens then is because we haven't forgiven ourselves, or we haven't forgiven that person for something that's happened, we keep seeing that lesson in our life in different capacities. And many times a workplace is actually a really like safe haven for those lessons to come about. If we think about like the whole concept of like personal development, because you're in a space where you're like you're intimate in a different way because you have to, you're having to work with someone all the time. You spend a lot of time with those individuals. You're challenging each other, the way that you think, the way that you operate, the way that you approach things. And thinking about growing up, there's probably someone in your life that challenged you, the way that you think, that way you operate, the way what you believed in. And so a lot of times when we're triggered at work, it has to be the same thing. So sometimes we have to sit down and be like, okay, what is this triggering inside of me? Where do I need forgiveness? Do I need forgiveness of myself? Do I need to forgive someone else? And how is that going to transform my relationships that are in my present day? And just even reflecting upon those three questions is really, really powerful experience, because all of a sudden it changes anywhere there's disharmony into a place of like harmony within yourself. And that's where the power comes in. And that's where forgiveness is such an important piece. And one of the things is like, if we don't forgive, as a leader, you could be like, oh, that person, they keep messing up and they keep doing these things. But then what you're doing is you're constantly having bias for that person. You're also constantly, even as a staff member, when you see the leader making mistakes, and if you're not having that place of like compassion and forgiveness and making, like, people are going to make mistakes. Everyone's human. And when we actually come back to the place of like, if people are human, they're going to make mistakes. Where can I forgive them? All of a sudden, then you're going to see them as a human and you're going to actually have different interactions with them. And your whole experience of your work will be very different than it was otherwise.
So we talk about forgiveness as the opposite of our place of judgment,
Yeah.
right? So we will judge people all the time, and this is the opposite of an empathetic position that we should always search and assume as leaders. So forgiveness is something that we give, but as leaders, forgiveness can be something we ask as well, right?
Yeah, completely. I mean, when we do inequity, diversity, inclusion work, we've seen this time and time again. How many leaders, because they're human, everyone's going to make mistakes. We have to ask for forgiveness. And I make mistakes all the time. I've been doing this work for 20 years. I'll say things and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. That was wrong. Or, and I have to ask for forgiveness. And especially when we live in this council culture, we have to think about the fact that we're the way that we're operating is based on our old programming. And all of a sudden you're asking people to operate in different ways. When we're stressed out, when there's mental health, when there's too much going on, you're naturally going to go back to your old ways and what's comfortable. And even though something could be a better way of doing things, but because if there's so much going on in the world, you're gonna go back to what's comfortable, and that may not be the right thing. And that's where we might have to ask for forgiveness, being like, I made a mistake and this was not the best. I didn't show up in the best way. And what can we do from here? And that's where I think that we need to have a little bit more compassion for each other as well. Like, we know people are making mistakes. Like, it's inevitable, right? Like, it's totally inevitable. And but that's why we need to have that compassion piece coming in and being like, they're going to make mistakes. And so when they ask for forgiveness, can we find it in ourselves to give it as well?
Wow, that's amazing. It's almost like an exchange that we can create. We talk about psychological safety all the time, right? So this brings a lot of safety when I expect the best of people, and that's something you talk to. I want to ask you that in a minute, but we expect the best, but we know that when people are taking risks, mistakes will happen. And at the same time, we create this space where everyone is safe. And if we do make mistakes, we will always expect people to thrive beyond that mistake. One action will not summarize an entire person in that arena, right? In that environment. Do you agree with that?
Well, completely. Completely. I mean, the thing is, like, if we start to judge people based on one action and forget everything else that they've done up until that point, if someone keeps doing the same thing, obviously there's only certain like, I'm a firm believer you can forgive once, but if the person does it again, you really have to consider, are they gonna, like, is that their behavior? And at that some points you have to be like, I'm sorry, this is not working. Like there's an opportunity to forgive, there's opportunity to kind of move on, but there's also an opportunity to be like, there's boundaries. You have to take care of
Yeah.
yourself, and you have to think about what's in the best of like the holistic situation. But at the end of the day, if one thing is gonna be the judgment that you're making on a person based on everything else that they've done, that actually just shows. I'm sorry, like this is where it's controversial, but like shows your own shortcoming because you're not
Mm.
able to actually see who that really who that person is, and and maybe if that's what all you're seeing within them, it's actually just looking at where can you stretch yourself and where do you need to actually give compassion to yourself as well, because if you can't give it to someone else, you're not actually not giving it to yourself as well. And I think that's where there's an important piece of like letting go of those high expectations and high expectations of yourself and others, and allowing actually for space for mistakes to happen as well.
And that's how growth happens, is when we give people this space. Or because sometimes I think that's a misunderstanding too, that we have that in spaces of high competition, like the competition is up here, and we are world class, and everything needs to be perfect, right? We create like our own shortcomings. We develop them by, it's almost like we are creating the obstacles for ourselves right there. And we will fall if we think in a very strict manner. um,
Well, I think it's like actually has to do with swipe culture of like dating apps too. Like all of a sudden you
mm,
have to be perfect because if you mess up once, people are like, I have another option, right? Like,
yeah.
and even if when it comes to jobs, like people have so many options these days. Employers have there's options like like our options have grown massively.
Mm,
There's so much that's available to us, but that's where I think that's where we're actually not like centering and being human in some ways and being like, well, how do I make this situation better that's in front of me right now? And it's so easy to be like, okay, well, you screwed up, like, peace out, I'm out, like, regardless of who it is or what the situation is and what the job is. But however, it's like, well, is there a possibility of this getting better? Is there a possibility of how I can show up as a better person in this situation? Or what's in the highest good for me? And what's a lesson in this for me that's going to actually allow me to advance my career in a very different way and actually learn from the situation? All of a sudden, it changes the dynamic in sense of like not everything isn't a transaction anymore. There's
mm,
actually a relationship and reciprocal energy that's going in and out of whether it's being a company, whether like whether it's a job, it's a company or whatever, because you're actually realizing that not even though we are replaceable, but you're also treating it as like you're treasuring and being grateful for what's in front of you at the time as well.
mm. I was discussing this with another leader the other day, and he mentioned that he develops his team in a way that he understands that the team he has working with him today is not the same as will be in a few months.
Yeah.
They may be the same people, but they won't be the same. And it's his job to make that team from today become that improved team of tomorrow, at least to inspire people to become better every day. And I think that's so brilliant because in a way, we are not hiring the people we need to have today for the project to deliver what we need today. We are actually hiring and developing people for who they may become.
Mm.
And forgiveness is key. Forgiveness is key in that way, right? If we're taking everyone by what they are, and who they are today, we won't have this space for development, for growth, to accumulate learnings on the way, if we're taking every single mistake into account.
Oh, I completely agree with that. I mean, I mean, each of us changes in each moment, right? Like
Mm,
like, let's just say who we started off 20 minutes ago while we were having this conversation. We probably have awarenesses already that we're not the same version of who we started at 20 minutes ago than who we are now.
yeah.
And afterward, we're going to reflect and we're going to be changed again. So thinking about if we're expecting people to stay the same or we're expecting people to not make mistakes or not grow or not shift and be like, oh, is this going to work for me? Is this not? then that means that we're actually just hindering their growth, and we're actually hindering the growth of what we're working on, because we're actually just trying to control everything rather than actually allowing the energy to kind of flow and being like, okay, mistakes are going to be made. Forgiveness is going to, forgiveness is key to be there. And so we can move forward and grow it from the perspective as well.
Yeah. You have written before that it's very rare that people will err maliciously or intentionally. This knowledge by itself, it changes perception, right? When things don't go well, when things go differently than what we expected or what we planned. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I will say that for leaders in organizations, because I know that there's some people out there who are being very malicious when we think about
Mhm.
trolls and things like that. So, and that's gone heightened. And some people also have mental health challenges that are going on that make them not see the world in a way that they feel it's pleasant. So that's, I mean, that's a whole different scenario that we can't, we have to be considerate of. But when we think about leaderships in many, and I think I wrote this article a little while ago, but it's when we're thinking about leaders, many times when they are having, um, when they do something wrong or they say something, it's very rarely that they actually mean ill intent or to try to be malicious, that they're like, I'm going to hurt someone when I say this, or
Mhm.
I want to say this to be offend that group, or whatever the case might be. And maybe this is my idealism of the world. And I feel like I believe that people are inherently wanting to do good. There are some people who do want to do bad. I see that, but this is like a whole
Mhm.
another argument that that's a whole
Yeah,
different,
it's one thing to understand that as an exception, than
yeah.
to live your life by that, right?
Yeah, and some people do. Like
Mm.
I have one of my best friends. We have this argument all the time. She believes that people. I believe inherently people are good. She believes inherently people decide if they're going to be good or bad, and that there's
Mm.
both, right? And we actually have
Yeah.
this whole argument. But regardless, at the end of the day, I think that we, even if people are inherently bad, maybe there's circumstance that made them bad. But if we're thinking about leaders in the context of workplaces, if they do something, it's very rarely that they're going to be like, I'm going to go hurt someone. So maybe there's a place, is there a place there that actually try to understand what the motives was and actually try to understand what the intention really was? When we think about intention versus impact, we know that intention sometimes, what happens with the intention, it can be good intention, but the impact can be horrible. But the thing is, when the impact is horrible, the person who made like does the act, like the leader who does the act, needs to take ownership that the impact was horrible. They need to say,
Mm.
"I'm sorry that that impacted you, in a way that was not my intention, and I'm sorry for that." And actually just take responsibility for hurting the person, because that was not their thing. And then also, it's asking the question, "How can I make this better now?" And even just by asking that question, it just changes the dynamic,
Yeah.
right? And
Totally, totally. Yes, I can see that how freeing this is. It's actually we talked about an environment where people have the safety to act, but at the same time, it's very freeing that okay, something did not go well, so I can make it better,
yeah,
right?
but
Yeah.
psychological safety, that's such an interesting concept right now, because that only happens when we actually trust each other. And when we think about like how do we foster trust in the workplace? A lot of it is like, hybrid working does actually help with fostering trust, because remote working doesn't help with fostering trust, because you're actually not getting those interactions and actually really getting to know each other. I love remote working. I've always worked remote, but it's harder to build trust, and it's harder
Yeah.
to build psychological safety in that sense if you don't have that trust. But psychological safety is an interesting thing, because when people will only like forgiveness, when it comes into like a leadership capacity and think about psychological safety, it comes from a place of that you have to inherently think that it's going to be safe for you to be vulnerable with each other, and safe for you to be like, I messed up. But if that's not, that trust isn't there, that you're going to be received, that's actually when people don't, they will, things happen where forgiveness doesn't happen, or people don't even ask for forgiveness, because they're like, I am going to get canceled or something's going to happen and this is going to destroy my career. And that's
Mm.
actually what we need to get away from in many ways.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you. Can you share key behaviors or practices, things that leaders can do so they create a more forgiving environment, a safer environment for their teams?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing is how do you show up? Like how do, like if we I mean, I know that with leaders they have to put themselves out there quite a bit. And it is the vulnerability being like, look, I made a mistake. Even claiming that, that's actually creates safety for other people to do that as well. Also, it is about creating a personal connection with one another in some capacity. Like even though we're working remote, trying to have a relationship, not sometimes trying to do personal calls wherever possible, like at least once in a while, just to actually get to know the person on a personal basis as well. That makes a bit difference because that actually creates that there's connection pieces there. When we're thinking about trust and psychological safety, we also have to look at, our body language, the language that we're using. How do we show up in meetings? Our words aligned with our actions. And though that embodiment is what creates psychological safety in many ways. And I think that one of the biggest thing is really thinking about like goes back to connection. The more that we foster connection, and actually create spaces where people feel that they're respected and they're valued and they're heard, through asking them, "Hey, I haven't heard from you yet. Do you want to speak up?" Or like, "You haven't contributed to this meeting," or "Haven't heard from you for a few days. What's going on? What are you working on? Like, is there anything I can help you with?" Like even those small little check-ins go a long way. People just want to know that they're cared for. And that
Yeah.
actually starts to harness this whole deeper sense of connection, which leads to trust and psychological safety as well.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm surely taking notes on this later on. It makes a ton of sense, as I mentioned. And um, you don't have to name any names, but can you share for us a few examples of specific challenges leaders you have coached in the past and how forgiveness has helped them overcome the challenges they had? Is there an example that comes to your mind, any
Yeah.
situation that you see, wow, this is an example how forgiveness can play a big role into developing leaders?
Yeah. Like there was this one leader right away comes to example, where people didn't really like in the organization, they loved her, but they also didn't like her. And so they loved how she showed like her vision, what she thought for the organization. But as a person, was volatile, wasn't really stable emotionally. People didn't really know what would happen or how they would show up. And it was interesting because as that person went on their inner journey, actually really got to deal with their own traumas and got to deal with their own inner being, and actually created a life that they actually were in love with outside of work. They started to be a better person at work, and then they actually had to have a conversation with their staff, being like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was an ass back then. Sorry for my language, but
Mm.
I was about,
Mm.
like, and and so I had to actually go and ask for forgiveness from these individuals. And it was interesting because like some people are like, oh, that's so great that they're asking and that we're having this conversation. Others were like, what, really? And they actually like because they still didn't feel safe with them. And
Yeah,
so it took
yeah.
a couple of years for that to happen. But it was really interesting because even through the coaching process, you could see as every time she forgave herself, it was easier for her to forgive for others to forgive her as well. And the
Yeah, and
biggest thing,
perhaps by forgiving herself, she wouldn't do the same mistake again, right? Or not at least not the same way. Is that how the process works? That she
yeah,
works on herself, she will become a better leader in the process.
completely, because she actually became so. Because so what happens is when you have a pattern, when you become aware of it, if you actually like become aware of it, and you're like, okay, what's another way of approaching it? You're less likely to repeat that pattern.
Mm.
And even if you are repeating it, you might repeat it for like 2 days, and then you're like, "Oh, wait a second, I think that's an old pattern." And then you're like, "Okay, let me switch." Then the next time it's gonna be for an hour. Then it's gonna be like you start to go back in an old way. You're like, "No, no." it's like a minute and you're like, okay, I gotta pivot. So you do change your behavior. And that's like the beautiful part about it. And so as she was forgiving herself for behavior change, and then others started to receive her differently as well, took others some to longer to, come to the place of like trusting and acknowledging the changes within her, where others are like, cool that she's doing her work, and how can I, continue to like her as a person now. So
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so inspiring for aspiring leaders as well. We know that a lot of aspiring leaders watch these. So I wanted to take the opportunity for you as a coach. If someone is an aspiring leader, they want to become leaders soon, they want that promotion, what would you advise for them? What are the steps of not only stepping up, but at the same time, do a good job?
I think the biggest thing is, I don't believe in aspiring leaders because I think leadership is a way of being. I think that leadership is a way of you
Love
show
that.
up in the world and the impact you make by being. And so that's what leading really is about. And I love Robin Sharma's book, Lead Without a Title. I think that's what it's called. But it's really
Mm.
powerful because it's about, it doesn't matter what your title is, but it's about being so passionate about what you're working on and doing the best job possible of where you're at. And then from there, that's what leadership is really about, is taking ownership and responsibility and making everyone else's experience around you a better experience. And that's, if you can actually cultivate that and embody that, you will be the best leader ever. And it's
That's
actually like,
amazing.
that's what leadership truly is about.
Yes. So, Manpreet, thank you so much. We're immensely grateful for your generosity in sharing your knowledge, your experiences with us. I cannot believe it's been half an hour already. I wanna listen to you even more and more. But yeah, this is the time we had, and your presence here really enhances our series. But before we conclude, are there any upcoming projects, any initiatives you'd like to highlight, and how can people get in touch with you?
For sure. The best way is LinkedIn. Just my LinkedIn is linkedin.com. I am Manpreet Dhillon. Um, Projects wise, yeah, so we actually have a group program coming up for women of culturally diverse backgrounds, looking at how they rise in the workplace. Is really focusing on like the holistic leadership, thinking about all aspects and how um, your being as like spiritual, mind, body, soul connects, and how that actually embodies you as a leader. So that we have that program coming up soon.
Wow, that's amazing. I'll make sure yeah, I'll make sure to check. It's so interesting and inspiring. Thank you so much again. And thanks everyone for joining. We'll see each other again at the next Leadership for Innovators Spotlight. Manpreet, sure see you soon. Have a great one. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye.